Hi friends, this is Caly. Thanks so much for joining me today for a slimline card using PinkFresh's Friendship Blooms set. It is a trio of stencils, dies, and the stamp set. And before we go any further, let me apologize for my voice. I've had laryngitis for over a week now, and don't worry, I tested for COVID and it was negative. So I'm on the mend, but this card needs to be shared, so we are going to go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to start with the very first stencil here, and these stencils are labeled with 1 through 5, so you know which one to start with. And then there are also corner markings for every corner of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece of cardstock. So that's an A2 sized panel. So now I've chosen my 3 colors here in pinks, and I'm just going to lightly ink blend the very first layer. This is the largest layer, so it's going to have more open space, and you're going to add shading for the next consecutive layers. And so it's going to get more and more detailed. I've got my Pink and Main ergonomic blending brushes, and I love them for ink blending these large open spaces. And in a little bit, when it gets more detailed, I'll use the mini ergonomic brushes, and I love that as well. So I've got the medium shade here. If you want the color details of these PinkFresh inks, make sure to check out the blog. They'll be linked on the blog post. I'm using PinkFresh Studio inks today, and I do that because I like to use the same products for the companies on the cards that I'm sharing, but feel free to use any inks that you might have on hand. I just recommend going with a very soft, light color for that very first layer, then a medium, then a dark, depending on how many layers there are, obviously. Sometimes I like to add even more color and using a finger dauber to get more details in there, but these layers are very intricate, so you can go ahead and just use what they have. Now the magic is going to come together when I stamp that outline image, which a lot of people tend to do first. I find that sometimes that ink does muddle it up a little bit, so I like to do that part last. Now we have a conundrum here because there are 2 parts to the stamp image. There is the bud and then the leaf. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and die cut that because I want it to line up perfectly. And if you stencil that in first, it might not line up right. So I recommend die cutting that portion first. So I've die cut that, and then I've inlaid it back in, and then I've taped it in place to make sure it doesn't move. That way I can line up the leaves to make sure that it fits perfectly on that die cut. So now we're going to go ahead and blend out that foliage with the lightest shade of green. And if you haven't noticed, I want to point out that I like to use the back of my ink pad lid to kind of work in that ink into my bristles. I find that that creates a really smooth blend. And when I'm done, I can just flip it over and cover up my ink pad, and I don't have a mess to wipe up. Okay, so now we have the more detailed layer of the foliage. So I'm going to switch to a mini ergonomic brush. That way I can get into the smaller portions of those nooks and crannies and get more detailed work done without overusing that larger area on the regular sized blending brush. I really love how detailed these layers get, and it adds all of the shading for you so you don't have to add extra shading, which I like to do most of the time. But I don't have to do that with this set because it's already so detailed. All right, so I'm going to peel that away, and we have these beautiful images. I'm going to remove that tape and adhere it over the top. That way I can put this whole thing inside my MISTI and align the outline stamps. This is where the magic happens. I'm going to line up what I can and stamp in 2 batches because these images are quite close together. When we stamp this, you're going to see these blooms come to life. And I just think it adds so much depth to the cards. You could leave it as is for a no-line look, but I really think these outlines on this particular stamp set is very fine, and it creates just the most detailed colored images. And it really brings those shades to life as well. So much detail, don't you think? I think this outline is just magnificent. These images are illustrated by Alex Siberia. She's super talented and has lots of floral images that she designs for several companies as well as her own. Okay, so now I'm going to die cut all of these images out, and they die cut beautifully. And because there are so many beautiful images, I've decided to create a slimline card. So I've got this scallop frame here, and this does come in 2 different pieces. Those scallops do separate from each other, but I'm keeping them together. And then for further texture, I wanted to add the diagonal stitched plaid in the background. What I'm doing now is strategically adding strips of foam tape over the line where these two scallop frames meet so that they stay adhered together, and then that way I can add lots of dimension to that plaid background panel. Once I have my background panel created, I'm going to go ahead and lay out my flowers and foliage and make sure that I like where everything is sitting and making sure that there is room for a sentiment. And then I'll use my press and seal to go ahead and lift all of those images up, add some foam tape, and then adhere it onto the panel in one layer so that nothing falls apart and you still have that layout that you like. I could have stopped here, but I love these curvy leaf dies, so I'm going to go ahead and die cut some vellum and attach those as well, just to give it a little bit more texture, make the blossoms a little bit more full, and adhere them in random places around this floral spray. All right, so once those are all in place, we can go ahead and work on the sentiment. I decided to stamp on vellum, so I'm going to go ahead and prepare that with my anti-static powder tool. Put that inside my MISTI, stamp it with some embossing ink, and then add that gold embossing powder and heat set that. I do trim it down a little bit because I want to make sure it fits inside that little space that I've provided for my sentiment on the card. And to attach that, I'm going to go ahead and add little slivers of foam tape just right underneath the fatter areas of that word wonderful, and then kind of tuck it behind that scallop frame. Okay, so once that's in place, we're going to go ahead and adhere it to a card base. My card base is 3.5 by 8.5, and I want to point out that PinkFresh's slimline dies are a little bit bigger. So I trimmed mine down a little bit because I prefer this size and I like that it fits into a number 9 or a number 10 size envelope. I don't think any PinkFresh Studio card is done without adding some jewels, so I went ahead and did that as well. And then that finishes my card for today. I hope you enjoyed this. I had so much fun creating this card, and I really, really love these images. Thanks so much for stopping by, and have a great day, everyone. Bye!